power isn't like some politician up there, weaving all these Machiavellian things to hurt and destroy people. That's the cliche. You've been watching House of Cards for too long. I know nobody watches that anymore, but whatever the new show is. So that's not power. Power is the ability to guide yourself through a very dangerous world, very competitive world where we're almost all having to kind of work for ourselves, where we don't get much help or cooperation from the world. We're thrown out of the university if we go to college, and here we're in this world where there are no rule books telling us how to navigate it. It's very complicated and very difficult, and you make mistakes that you can suffer for. And power is knowledge, is ideas, is understanding how to navigate a very dangerous world. Okay, so you want that, to get back on track to what I was saying. So you want that, right? You want to be, this is something that I talk about in Mastery, the idea of wasting your potential, of never realizing your goals, of never being able to create that business you wanted to create, or make that film that you think is in you, or start the business that you're starting, Tom. That's what you want in life. And if you don't want that, there's nothing I can say that'll help you, right? I'm starting with the assumption that you want that, and I think most people do want that. Okay, so your rage, you're constantly wasting time on the internet. You're constantly being infected by the emotions of other people, is wiping away day by day, second by second, all of your own power, right? Because what is your power? Your power, as you, Tom, is to be able to realize what makes you different, what makes you unique. I don't quite remember the full trajectory of your career, but I remember you early on with the health company that you had started and all this. And then you had a plan. Your plan is to create this kind of empire. I'm not trying to reveal your secrets here, but you had...
I'll reveal away. Okay.
You have this idea of creating a new kind of empire, sort of a new Disney, right? And that comes from something within. I'm assuming that there's something of the child in you that wants that you've wanted that for a while, that it represents something that's unique about you. It's not something that comes from social media or the people around you. That could play a small role, but it's mostly something from within you. It's you, okay? And that's you. What makes you different and unique is your source of power. And the days you spend getting angry about things that have nothing to do with your day-to-day life, they're corroding that uniqueness of you, and they're making you a conforming Pavlovian dog that's just like everybody else out there in the world. If you look at the people who are truly successful and powerful, see them as kind of models or icons to reach. Okay? It's not to say that we all have to be incredibly successful to feel fulfilled. I'm not saying that. I know people who are really great carpenters who are great at that, and that's really fulfilling. And I know people who just want to be parents, and that's their life's task, and it's tremendously fulfilling. But the people who are really successful, even at those things, we can say that they're unique, that they're one of a kind, that there's nobody else like them, and that is the source of your power, right? So you want that. If you don't want that, I can't help you. But if you do want that, the time you're wasting getting enraged and being manipulated and feeling all these things and just getting into that lizard part of you is time you're wasting, and your life is a lot shorter than you think it is.
Whew, ending on a big one there. Before we get to mortality, death, all that, which I think is incredibly powerful, I want to talk about the idea of Carl Jung and the shadow side. So no, I don't think there's anybody writing today that speaks as eloquently as you do about the shadow, about the sort of dark energy that we all have inside of us that can be extraordinarily powerful. And I know you well enough to know your beliefs around this are nuanced, but listening to you as you were talking there, it's like, don't get sucked into rage. You're going to be wasting your life. Life is shorter than you think. That is true. But there's also an element of capture that rage, my friend, leverage that rage, point it at something that makes sense. And this is where it gets incredibly complicated, because if you have a goal and there's something that you want to go after, letting something piss you off can actually be quite powerful. And I talk to my students in Impact Theory University about this idea of having an animus, having something that that literally animates you, that you can't live in a world where that thing is true, and holding on to your anger enough to turn it into something usable. So you're not just flailing around, reacting, freaking out, but it's like, hey, this is not okay. I'm going to fan the flames of that. I'm not going to let them burn me to death, but I'm going to fan the flames of that, get angry, and go do something about it. So how do you think about that? As you point out very aptly that the anger can cause you to waste your life, but also it's a tool. How do you help people reconcile that idea?
Well, these are all great. Another great question. Well, I'm thinking back on myself and the anger that propelled me to where I am today, which was largely my experiences in Hollywood. And just to tell that story very briefly, I worked in Hollywood from like the very late 80s into the mid 90s. And I saw a lot of very, very manipulative people, and a lot of hypocrisy, where it was supposedly all about creating great art or making a film, but really it was about power. It was about using people and getting what you wanted out of it, and getting more power than the other person and getting recognition. And that was the true subtext of what everybody motivated most people in Hollywood. And man, that pissed me off. The hypocrisy of that pissed me off. Okay, now, is that something that comes from, is that just sort of a superficial reaction to me feeling like, because I wasn't successful, was I just simply hurt? Was it more like envy because I wasn't very successful myself in Hollywood, to be honest? Or did it come from something deeper? And in analyzing it, yes, it came from something very deep. Since I was a child, I've always been very, very sensitive to people's hypocrisy, to people pretending to be something that they're not. And I think a lot of children are like that. They have antennae for that. Right? And it really angered me. And then you could ask yourself, well, why?
Why does that anger you?
Because I feel like, it's like people pretending to be something that they're not,
And you just have an inherent value that's a bad thing?
It's not just an inherent value. It's just that we're all flawed creatures. And I must have been aware since I was a child that I am a flawed individual. Robert, I have dark emotions. I can be kind of bitter and aggressive and ambitious and hurtful, right? I knew from very early on of my own flaws. And it really irritated me that people pretended to be something else, that they weren't true to themselves. And I could see that in children who were pretending to be the little princess or the prince in their family, like they were perfect, that they were really good. And then I would see the other side when we, for mommy and daddy, they were all perfect. But then when we played, I could see the little nasty little rascal come out, right? I hated that. Okay, we could dig deeper and deeper. Well, why did I hate that? But I think it came from something very real something about me. So my anger at Hollywood wasn't really, I don't deny that there was an element of I didn't get success, so I feel kind of envious, because we all feel that. But I don't think that was the full picture. There was something very real about it. And because I've been feeling it throughout when I was a kid, it was feeling it throughout my 20s. It was the subject of all of the short stories, novels, and plays and screenplays I was trying to write. So it came from a very deep, real place. So when it came time to write my first book, The 48 Laws of Power, beginning in 1996, I had to draw on that anger, And if it had been something that wasn't really me, if it was something that was just a gimmick, I don't think it would have worked. So if your emotions don't come from something that's very profound about who you are, about that dark side, isn't something that you are, but it's like a gimmick, you're just pretending to be angry, and there are a lot of people who do that, or you're pretending to have some other kind of emotion. We humans, we can smell that. We can sniff out phoniness fairly well. But I felt it very deeply. And I disguised it in the 48 Laws. I channeled it into a book where you never really knew that it was from Hollywood. I never talked about myself, but you could feel the subtext of some kind of little bit of anger there at people's hypocrisy, right? So I took an emotion that was part of who I am, right? And I used it in very constructive, channeled, productive way, which is what I say about the dark side. So, to get back to the theory behind it, when you were a child, you were what I call you were like a round ball, a ball that had a front side and a dark side that's not visible, like the dark side of the moon, right? The front side was you're saintly, you're sweet, you're nice and loving to your parents, you treat your sister and your brother so well, you get along with all your friends. But the dark side was, wow, man, I really hate that kid. I'm going to pull her hair. I'm going to mess his homework. I'm going to do this. All the things that kids naturally do because we have an animal nature. We have aggressive impulses. This includes boys and girls. I'm not certain girls can be just as part of this as boys are. Okay, and then as you get older, that you like cut that ball in half, and you only present that only. It's not only that you just present the good side; it's that you kind of forget about that other half, and it drops away from you, and you just pretend to be this good person because you're socially motivated to make people think that you're a nice, pleasant, socially aware person, and then all that dark energy gets repressed and repressed and repressed. But nothing ever goes away. That's the law of human psychology. Things you felt when you were 3 or 4 or 5, they don't go away. They just sit in you. And they either sit in you and stew and then explode when you're 30 into some irrational behavior, or you're aware of it. You're aware that I feel this way. You're aware that I feel envy. You're aware that you feel aggression and anger. You're aware that you sometimes actually want to hurt people, okay? You're aware that you're a full human being and you're not a fucking hypocrite like so many people are out there. I have a dark side. It's part of who I am. All right.
But don't you try to keep that in check? I mean, it's not like, what's your prescription on that? Is it like, what does it mean to integrate the shadow?
It means, we keep coming back to this, as I said, I'm so boring here because I keep repeating the same idea. It means you're aware of it, right?
But being aware that I'm angry or that I have bitterness or whatever, isn't it really because what I'm trying to figure out is you and I react very differently to the sort of bullshit of Hollywood's a great example because now as you have exited, I am now trying to enter. And because I am so hyper aware of how people talk about Hollywood, I came in and said, look, I'm just going to make my reputation I'm always going to tell you where I'm at. So when I see somebody being fake, full of shit, whatever, because I'm attuned enough to see it, for the most part, I'm sure people pull some things over on me. But for the most part, I feel like I can sniff it out, like you were saying before. But I have almost a sadness that that's the only tool that they've learned to leverage. And so I don't get the sort of anger towards people that are manipulative or whatever. Go ahead.
That's fine. But what's your point?
So where I'm going is how do you get to the point where now you're not just being aware of it, but you're using it? So it's how can somebody who's listening to this go, I am going to take so you gave us the example of how you channeled it into your book, but now just in terms of daily life, I'm guessing when you see somebody being fake, you don't rage out on them. So you are restraining.
Sure.
It. So when I talk about integration, is it the awareness leads to just being able to hold it back? Or is there, I will use it, if somebody's bullshitting me and they're trying to be aggressive to me, then I just be aggressive back. And so there's an element I feel like I can control it. Aggression, anger are tools in my tool belt, and I pull them out when I think they're appropriate.
Yeah. Well, that's good, but are you conscious? Are you aware that you're doing that, or are you just simply reacting to people? Are you able to?
That's certainly been an evolution.
Are you able to use it in a somewhat strategic way? So, for instance, there's somebody you come across in Hollywood who is a manipulator, and you can smell it. But if you simply call them out on it, you might create some problems for yourself. You might create a counter reaction that will work against you. Are you able to step back and go, I need to be strategic with this asshole. I need to not just simply react. I need to say something that will either show him or her that this is what they're being like, or I need to take some kind of action that will thwart them. Are you able to do that, or are you just simply getting angry in response?
It's I'm very strategic, but at the same time, I want to feel good about who I am as I walk away from that exchange. So I don't want to feel like I'm just bullshitting people either. So normally I put it into asking questions about like, what's your goal? Or I'll even say like, it feels like you're angry with me or upset with me and I don't understand why.
Yeah.
And if you can help me understand, I'm certainly not trying to piss you off. And it has, like, I won't say it, I haven't been in it long enough to know what the long-term repercussions of my strategy are going to be. It's created awkward moments. It has certainly ended potential relationships. But I'm constantly trying to think about who I want to be in the exchange when I walk away and what I want my long-term reputation to be. And that means having the uncomfortable conversation up front so that what I say to you doesn't end up being different than how I actually move, if that makes sense.
But how is that your dark side?
Well, so what I'm trying to figure out in terms of what you mean by integrating. So I'm guessing it, hey, here's what I do, which is if somebody's being aggressive towards me and it seems like the right answer, then I will like let off like that little valve of, instead of repressing everything, I will let a little bit come out. But I don't know. The only way that I leverage my shadow is as energy when I'm alone. So I don't know that I'm integrating it in an intelligent way in these exchanges. And I think that's part of what I'm looking for is feedback on if there's a way that I haven't got. So here's how I present it to people that ask me. And I say 80% of your time should be in the light, should be in the beautiful things, the wonderful things you want to create, optimism, hope, compassion. 20% of the time, you're going to lean on, I call it the dark energy, the shadow side, where it is, for instance, when I am fucking exhausted to my core and I just do not have energy to keep going, in those moments, I think about the people that want me to fail. And I'm like, fuck them. I am not going to let them be right. I am not going to let them see me fail. It is a dark, ugly, petty energy, and it's fucking intoxicating, and it gets me up, and it gets me going, and it keeps me
pushing. You're answering your question right there. You're answering my question. There's your integration right there. You're taking an emotion that could be destructive if you acted on it in the wrong way, and you're using it as a way to motivate yourself. You're not spewing this at people. You're making it sort of sharpen your own ambition, your own goals, and go, I better get up in the morning and prove this idiot that they're wrong about me. You're not hurting them, but you're channeling it into something productive. So you just answered your question. That's very much integrating it. It's whether your dark side is used for destructive purposes. I'm not advocating that you hurt people. I didn't go out and ever name a single name of anybody in Hollywood who ever did it. You could read my book. You'll never know that that's what it was about, right? I didn't want to hurt people. I don't like you. I don't like hurting people. It makes me feel ugly. And that ugly feeling ends up costing me more than any kind of benefit I might have gotten from venting it, right? I don't want that. But so you're not actually trying to hurt people. You're using it to make yourself more productive. So, for instance, you have a business, you have ambitions, you have goals, and you use all the people who doubt you, like you're doing, and you're going to make that a motivating device. That's very powerful. Let's say you're an artist, and you've had your parents were really nasty to you. They were very abusive, and you carry that around with you, and it's like this 500-pound rock on your whole life. It's just pressing you down. And now in your play or your book or your movie, you let it out. And you don't say this is who they are, but you express it indirectly about very manipulative people, and you show your kind of anger in a work of art. And some of the greatest works of art have an underpinning of some kind of motivating anger. That's productive. Let's say there's something that really pisses you off in the world, some form of injustice, whether it's sexism, racism, whatever it is. Instead of like just getting on Facebook and posting all kinds of stupid little things that are not getting anywhere, you go out and you decide, I'm going to start a movement. I'm going to create some kind of social movement that's going to actually get something done. I'm actually going to contribute to society instead of just venting and spewing my own personal pet peeves. You're taking that dark energy and you're channeling it into something productive. That's the integration. You're not using it to hurt people. You're using it to motivate you to create something. And the other thing is, we live in a culture that is so politically correct, where people are so worried about, if I use this pronoun, am I going to offend that person? If I say this, am I going to lose my career? We're all so repressed that to see somebody who expresses some of that repressed emotion in their work, particularly in a work of art, it's like, wow, that's great. It's an attraction. It's a form of charisma that we'll have because you're less repressed than other people. So I'm trying to tell people that dark side contains incredible creative energy, incredible motivating power, like you said, when you get up in the morning, and use it. Don't be afraid of it, but use it. Does that kind of answer what you're asking?
Help us understand what the world is really like. What do you think is that key thing that people misunderstand?
Well, the key thing is it goes back to our nature and how we evolved as conscious animals. The key thing is there's an animal part of our nature, which is we completely take appearances for reality. That's sort of the source of our problems and our misery, to be honest with you, in life. So the front that people present, the way they look, the way they talk to us, their words, we sort of take at face value. And although we might think, or we might know from reading a book or whatever, that you can't always trust appearances, is kind of a cliche. We can't control ourselves. So it makes us extremely vulnerable to charming people, to charlatans, to con artists, to politicians who say one thing, who do another, to relationships, terrible relationships where we fall in love with exactly the wrong person, to the worst kind of hires. You know, I do a lot of consulting work. I've been doing it for over 20 years now. The number one problem I deal with is I hired the worst person in the world and they're making my life hell, right? And why did you hire the wrong person? Because you judge them on their charming smiles, their appearance, their smooth talk, their resume, which you can conceal a lot with your resume. You didn't look behind the facade and look at what's underneath the character. So this is kind of ingrained in our nature. It goes back thousands and thousands of years. It's extremely difficult to overcome, right? And I have the problem too. I deal with it all the time. And I have to go through a process where I step back and I say, I don't want to be paranoid, but this person is so nice and pleasant. Is there something else going on behind the curtain that's there? You know, and then sometimes I tell myself, no, I have ways of judging that there's a consistency between the face and the reality, but oftentimes there is not. And I've become very good at that kind of bullshit detection, which I've been doing my whole life.
How do you get good at that?
Well, you know, some things are hard to put into words, which is why I struggle so much with my books. Because a lot of human communication, I estimated 95%, it's just a number, is nonverbal, right? So we don't pay much attention to that because we're so word oriented, right? We're so embedded in language that we think everything in terms of what people say. But unconsciously, without even realizing it, we're continually judging people on their nonverbal behavior, right? So their eyes, their smile are different from what they actually say, but we're not really. So in a kind of a natural, intuitive way, we understand that, but we don't trust those kind of judgments, right? So we rely more on what they say than on what the signals that we pick up from their body language. So years and years of training and being sensitive to it, it's probably something that has to go back to my childhood. If you put me on a couch and psychoanalyze me right here, there was probably something in my childhood where I had to learn how to really read people, not by what they said, but everything about them. And I have a kind of a feel, an intuitive feel for the energy, the vibrations, the mood that people give off, not through what they say, but through their body, through particularly their tone of voice and all the other signals. That is the main way of judging, you know, what's really going on. The other thing you look at are people's patterns of behavior, right? Things that have happened in the past. As I said in Laws of Human Nature, nobody ever does something just once, right? If somebody fucks up and does something kind of hurts you in some way, and they say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me. That's not me. Don't trust that. It'll happen again. For sure, it will happen again a second, a third, a fourth time.
What do you think is going on there? Because when you were going through the list of things, being in a bad relationship was the one that really jumped out of, you hear people ending in these just like horrendous cycles of being stuck in this abusive relationship, and the person manages to reel them back in. What is going on the side of the person who convinces themselves to go back into that relationship? Is there the need to be loved? Is there a wound or something that they're trying to deal with? And how do you advise people that are stuck in a loop like that?
Well, it's probably from some kind of primal wound, right? So there's a perverse part of human nature, which is oftentimes in early childhood, something happened to us, often something that didn't happen to us, like the love we didn't get or the nurturing that we didn't get. There's this kind of wound, this emptiness, this lack, right? And we grow up and we're not really aware of it, and kind of things grow over this wound. But what also happens, which is the perverse side of human nature, is that early on, our kind of sexual excitement is sort of kind of grows up around that wound.
Why? That is so weird, and yet seems so self-evidently true.
Yeah.
But why?
Well, I'd have to go into something, go inside my own psychoanalytic, mindset here. But, when you're very young, you're extremely vulnerable. You're extremely open to the energies of other people in ways we don't understand right now, right? It's hard to imagine something what I'm writing about right now in my new book. When you're 2 years old, 1 year old, before you even had really mastered language, you're so dependent on other people. You're so open to them that their energy gets infused. It's completely internalized. And also, children at that age also have their sort of sexual nature is being created at that moment, at a very, very early age. Certain desires. For us, sex is not just a physical thing. It's an emotional thing, right? It's psychological. So things that we didn't get are charged with all of this kind of energy that then could later on turn into sort of desires. So let's say, for instance, you had a mother who was very narcissistic, who really wasn't giving you the normal mother, nurturing, empathetic energy. It was more about her, and you had to pay attention to her, right? Well, that kind of creates the sort of desire. You're as an infant, you really want that love from that mother. You're trying to attract it, pull it out of her as best you can. And your energy, your desire is surrounding her with this kind of emotional charged sexual energy. And you're going to find throughout your life, you're going to be attracted to narcissistic women. It's going to be your Achilles heel throughout your life, because you want to kind of heal that wound. You want to be able to play back that initial trauma and sort of rewrite the way it ended up, where now you're going to find this narcissistic woman and she's going to give you finally what you never had before, right? It's a very, very common pattern, right? And so you're not even aware of this. And it's extremely difficult to break out of, because your desire is for this type of person. So you might meet a woman, just doing it from a man's point of view, who isn't narcissistic, who's very empathetic and very caring. And she would be perfect for you. And you may even have a relationship with her. But the excitement, the energy, that charge isn't going to be as strong as with that other type. And you're going to fall back into the old patterns again and again and again. And the only way out of it is to go back and look at your early childhood and look at these wounds and confront them face to face and understand that you're a prisoner of this kind of things that were ingrained in you at a very, very early age.
And what does that process look like? Like, how do you confront something like that well? How do you even develop the awareness of the problem?
Well, you have to look at what's going on in the present right now. You have to be, first of all, it depends on how old you are and how many relationships you have, but you have to see your own patterns. And if you have unhealthy patterns where you have fallen again and again and again for the wrong person, you have to see a sort of a through line there. What ties it all together? What's going on, right? So A common scenario that I wrote about in Human Nature is, in this particular scenario where your mother is giving you the attention that you think you want, right? You have this feeling when you're a child, 3 or 4 years old, that mother is abandoning you, that it's almost your fault in that case, right? Because you don't want to believe that a parent could be wrong or flawed because it's too painful a thought. So you want to think that you are flawed and she has abandoned you for some reason. It's very painful. So what you're going to do throughout your life is you're always going to be the one cutting off a relationship before it gets too intense so that you don't ever have to go through that abandonment feeling again, right? That's your pattern, right? So after 6 months, the relationship is kind of, growing. You'll find some excuse. She's not right for me. She's saying the wrong things. She's da-da-da-da. You'll break off the relationship, blaming her, when in fact, you're deeply afraid that she's going to abandon you and you can't stand that. So you've got to see these patterns, and they're very painful and they're very difficult because they're touching upon things that go to the heart of who we are. It's not just in your relationships. You're going to probably be doing that with your jobs as well. You're going to be quitting jobs before you get to the point where you have too much responsibility. They're very, very deeply ingrained in you, and you have to be able to look at them. So awareness is everything. The ability to look at yourself realistically and understand, you're saying, see things as they are, see the world as it is. It begins with yourself, seeing yourself as you are, right? And seeing that your adult self that's so confident and has this, this way about the world is covering over some wounds, some vulnerabilities from your deep childhood. Not everybody, but for a lot of people, that's the case. You have to be willing to rip away the skin and look underneath and see that wound and touch upon it, and then kind of analyze it and sort of see the patterns in your life before you can begin to.
One thing that you do really well, which I think is definitely part of your appeal, is that you're able to write about these difficult things in human nature without needing to remove yourself. So you're not doing it as a spectator. Oh, those humans over there, they've got problems. You're able to really look at it yourself. So as you think about this process of ripping the skin away, I think was the phrase that you said, and confronting that, how do you begin to translate what's actually happening without the need for the ego to step in and say, no, to not go in either direction, quite frankly, to either then say, oh, because you have this flaw, you are a loser, or to blind yourself to the flaw and say, no, it's not a problem. Like, how do people find that middle ground of acknowledging it without succumbing to negative emotion around it?
That's a great question. So sometimes, you need help in these areas, depending on the depth of the wound. So sometimes you need a third person's eyes on it. You can't necessarily analyze it yourself, which is why you might want to go into therapy, or you might want a spouse or significant other or someone you love and trust who can tell you these things, because sometimes it's very hard for you to have any kind of distance from them, But the ability to detach yourself from your own emotions is extremely important in life. It doesn't mean that you become a cold, rational person at all. I don't believe in that at all. Emotions are extremely important for us. It's what makes us creative. It's what feeds our imagination, gives us drive. But the ability that you can gain over your life in this instant and in every other instant to have a degree of a detachment, it's only a matter of degree, where you can stand back and you feel something very powerfully. You feel attracted to something or a person. You feel excited or repulsed, and to not react and to step back and analyze and go, why am I feeling this right now? Is it because of what somebody is saying right now, or does it go deeper to that? Is it related to some other issue? That is a skill that is not easy, but you can develop it day by day by day, taking little steps. And so if you're able to slowly detach yourself from your day-to-day emotional reactions, it gives you a little bit of distance between you and your ego, right? So I meditate every morning. I've been doing it now for 11 years, for like over 40 minutes. It's a ritual that if I don't do, I feel extremely depressed. Something's wrong. Okay. And when I'm meditating, I become deeply aware. These thoughts start coming up. They bubble up. You can't control them. You become deeply aware of your ego, of certain patterns in your thinking, of certain anxieties, of certain kind of neurotic thought patterns, right? You're seeing it before your eyes. It's floating there. This is your ego, Robert. It's going here, there, and there. You can see it. And now, when you're in that state, you can almost see it as if it's another person. And it's very powerful and it's very liberating. Now, in the case of someone who's dealing with a deep wound, I don't know if you can't go there like tomorrow and do this. I'm a realistic person. I'm very practical. I don't want to advise people something that's not going to happen. It's something that you're going to have to, it's a life skill that you have to build, the power to take a step back and look at yourself with some distance and see that ego as if it's over there. It's floating in front of you. It's giving you signs of who you are. You know, you can develop that, and it's very powerful, and it will give you the ability to look at your own wounds objectively. But you're never going to reach a degree of 100% detachment. Me, who has been practicing this for many years, I still get caught up in those wounds. I still get caught up in my ego. It's just a matter of degree. That's all I'm talking about.
This is such an insanely complicated issue when I think about, okay, so if the number one problem is people aren't aware that there's a game being played, basically, you can't take things sort of at their surface. And then understanding that, as you were saying, that self-awareness is also this critical part. Then there are the studies that have shown that your mind will give you a reason for something, even when that reason is obviously not true. And I don't know if you heard about that study where people that have had the ability to form long-term memories damaged, so they can do short-term memories, but you could reintroduce yourself to them every 3 minutes and they'd be like, oh my God, they'd greet you anew each time. And the doctor put a pin in his hand and he walked in and he shook hands and it poked the person. They jerked their hand back like, you know, why'd you do that? They leave, they come back 3 minutes later. The person does not remember meeting them at all. They stick out their hand and the person will refuse to shake it. And so they don't remember ever meeting them before. And so they'll say, why won't you shake my hand? Oh, well, you know, I've had a long-standing rule. I don't shake the hand of people with white lab coats. And they come up with all these different excuses because the brain can't like sit there in this ignorance. And so you have something that's clearly hardwired in us I have heard humans referred to as meaning-making machines, which makes a lot of sense to me. We make meaning out of something.
Right.
So if we have this hardwired propensity to come up with some sort of meaning, something somewhere, and we have the psychological immune system, which doesn't want me to feel badly about myself. So now I have an inclination to lie to myself, basically, from some like deep-seated part of me that survives even damage to the ability to make long-term memories. And so when I think about the deck being stacked against people in terms of really figuring out what's actually going on inside themselves, it gets a little scary. And this is where, so for me, when I think about, okay, if all of the things that I just said are true, nested inside of all the stuff you've been talking about, the only path I see out of that is because everyone needs self-esteem. So your psychological immune system's trying to make you feel good about yourself. Got it. So you need to take conscious control of feeling good about yourself, but you need to wrap it around something anti-fragile so that for the only answer I've come up with in my own life is to be the learner. That way, if I do something stupid, I make a mistake, whatever, I can just go, hey, that sucks. And it does make me feel badly, but I only value myself for being a learner. And since recognizing how I actually am would be useful, then I'll face the truth of what this is, right, and then I can learn and move on.
Well, you touch on an extremely important, critical thing here, the element that I'm trying to hit at, which is your level of desire for change. So if you're trapped in these patterns and you feel a great degree of pain and your life isn't going anywhere and you're having bad relationships, bad work habits, and you say, I can't deal with this anymore, you're extremely motivated to go through the process that you just mentioned, which is after every event that occurs, you go through a kind of an autopsy, right? And you analyze. You can do this on a daily basis with a journal, or you can do it on a weekly basis. You know, what did I do there? What was the element of where I actually might have created the problem between me and another person? And I have to be reasonably rational, and I have to be reasonably realistic. You're right. If we saw completely into ourselves, we would hate ourselves so thoroughly that we wouldn't get out of bed. We would all be killing ourselves. You do need a degree of illusion. You do need a degree of self-esteem and confidence, right? And what happens is, it's kind of like an internal thermostat. And so you have like people who are what I call deep narcissists, who have no kind of sense, no anchor inside of them, no real sense of self-esteem to hold on to. And when that self-esteem starts going down, 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 they have no way of dealing with it. And their only way of dealing with it is acting out in the way that narcissists act out. So we all have, if we're not a deep narcissist, we have that thermostat where things start hurting us a little bit, and we bring ourselves back up through this self-esteem mechanism so we don't get too depressed and too down. And there's an element of unreality to that, but it's very valuable. And I would never, ever, ever want to burst that. You need a degree of illusion in your life. It's very important. But if you really want change, if you're really fed up, if you're not kidding yourself, if you're not going through this bullshit process, yeah, I kind of want to change my life, but you don't really mean it, then no words, no therapy will ever get you to that point. You almost have to hit bottom. You almost have to tell yourself, I can't take this anymore. And now the motivation is so deep that you're able now to begin the process of going through that kind of self-analysis, because it's the only way you're going to get out of it. It's the only way. A lot of our culture is making this worse in a way, unfortunately. I mean, there's good things in our culture now, but there are bad things.
Give me some of the bad.
Well, I think social media, for all the good that it does, makes it very hard to be self-reflective.
Interesting. I thought for sure you were going to say it just leads us to compare ourselves. Why does it make it hard to be self-reflective?
Well, it does. Well, comparing yourself is not self-reflective. When you compare yourself, your standard is always what other people are doing, right? They're on these great vacations. He's got a great job. Tom has this amazing house where I'm living in this hovel in Los Feliz, right? That's not looking at myself. That's always having the other person as the standard. It makes us so out in the world, in other people, what other people are saying, what other people are doing. It makes us continually think in the social sense and not able to turn inside and look at who we are, what makes us different. We're so attuned to what's cool, to what other people are doing out there, to what other people are saying, that we lose a kind of an intuitive grasp of who we are, right? So the psychologist Abraham Maslow talked of impulse voices. He said that a child of 1 year old has this impulse voice that says, I like this fruit. I don't like this fruit. I'm going to throw it away, right? And then other things, these voices inside that make them that individual. This is what they like and what they hate, right? And these are very, very important as you develop later in life. This is what you love. These are the subjects that interest you. These are subjects you're not interested in. These are the people you like. These are the people you don't like. It's who you are in the deepest sense of it. It's what I call your primal inclinations. It's you at its core. And if you're so attuned to what other people are saying and doing and telling you and thinking, that voice gets drowned out by a million other voices, and you're not able to hear yourself anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard to take a step back and actually look at yourself and analyze yourself. So I think that in some ways this dilemma that we're talking about is getting more and more difficult, because to be able to do what you're talking about, you have to be willing to be alone. You have to be willing to close the door in your room, write down and say, this is what's going on. This is what happened. This is what I did. This is what they did. You can't be out there in the world and do this. It's impossible to do that process, because you're going to be sucked into the social dynamic and you won't be able to think about yourself. So I think it's made things a little bit harder for people.
When you talk about like magical thinking and a culture of BS, what do you mean?
Well, we humans are gifted with a form of consciousness. As far as we know, there's no other animal on this planet that has it. Perhaps on another planet there's something similar we don't know yet. But it comes with a price. Basically it's the same sized brain that was developed through the course of evolution hundreds of thousands of years ago in circumstances that are completely different from where we are now. right? So evolution is a very slow process. So our brains haven't really changed that much. What has increased is the incredible exponential explosion of our knowledge, particularly in the sciences. But at the same time, that part of our consciousness, our awareness, lays on top of a brain that is very primitive in its nature. I mean, the brain is structured in a kind of a hierarchical manner. And at the very bottom are those most primitive layers, but it's often in cliched terms called the lizard brain, but it's very real. And then there's a kind of a midbrain that's more, evolutionary, that's more where our emotions come from, and kind of a connection between the lowest part and the highest part. Anyway, so we have this knowledge, this ability to to stand back from our immediate circumstances and contemplate possibilities. Oh, I don't have to react like an animal to this thing happening. I can step back and I can think. Perhaps I could do A, B, or C, as opposed to just reacting. And that is incredibly powerful. It's what has made us who we are today. But the problem with it is we don't know how to use our brains because we still are trapped in that very primitive model that we have. And so we feel emotions, and emotions tend to govern so much of our thinking because they're much more powerful than the kind of weak little signals that come from the frontal cortex. And so we're not aware of how deeply our emotions are infecting our decisions in our day-to-day life. And the people who know this the best are people in marketing, because they have been studying since the 1950s all of the amazing psychological experiments about how you can kind of manipulate people. How if you're a salesman and you just lightly touch somebody on the arm as a friendly gesture, they're 80% more likely to buy your product, right? If you use their name, all these other little tricks, they've been studying it, and they know deeply how much that emotional part of us governs our decisions when we buy things. They call it the affective heuristic. It means that our decisions are largely based on emotions. And the problem that we face is we're not aware of that. That was the whole subject of the laws of human nature. We walk around thinking that we're making decisions rationally, that when we buy a product or that when we choose a partner to get involved with, to marry or whomever, that we're basically basing this on certain kind of rational, protocols. But we're not at all. We're infected very, very deeply with emotions. And so that lack of awareness, that belief that we are rational when we're not rational, is very, very dangerous. Because, answer me this, Tom, how many people do you know who admit to the fact that they are irrational, that a decision they made in life, even one that was a mistake, came from an irrational part of them, that it wasn't something that was thought through, that it wasn't something as strategic? I bet you could count them on one hand, Yeah. And I'm as guilty of that as the next person. It's very much part of our nature to deny the fact that mostly we're governed by emotional responses to the world around us.
Yeah, one of the things that I find the most interesting in psychology are the studies of people that have, one brain defect or another. I think it was V.S. Ramachandran that did the study on, I forget what the damage was to the guy's brain, but he had no short-term memory. So a doctor would come into the room and they did this test, and the doctor put a pin in his hand, and he shook hands with the guy and it jabbed him. And, the guy jerks back. It's like, what the hell? Doctor leaves, comes back 3 minutes later, goes to shake the guy's hand, and the guy won't shake his hand. Now, remember, he has no short-term memory. So the doctor says, oh, why won't you shake my hand? And the guy's like, well, I'm really uncomfortable with people in white coats. And obviously he's doing it because some part of his brain retained the fact that when he shook hands with this guy that it caused pain. And
right.
the conscious mind, though, is pasting over some rationalization to explain away this weird behavior. And the fact that our minds are working so rapidly to deliver these socially acceptable reasons for why we're doing something, when in reality that isn't at all why we're doing something, that gets really scary really fast. But the other thing, and I've heard you talk about this before, again, one of the most interesting things I've ever come across, where people's brains get damaged and they no longer have access to their emotions. And so now they're frozen out. They cannot make a decision because when you're trying to, think your way through something, we're relying on a feeling, an embodied feeling of one is better than the other. So
Right.
if it is impossible for us to move forward without emotion and dangerous to be unaware of our emotions, how do we move forward?
Well, it's not that complicated. So you bring up a good point. A lot of people have a misconception that rationality is the ability to repress your emotions, to somehow subtract them from your decision-making process. And that is exactly the wrong way to approach it, because think of it in your own life. If you meet somebody who turns out to be very toxic, like a toxic narcissist, you're going to get a gut reaction, an emotional response from them, right? Something's wrong with this person. And then that causes you to start thinking about, maybe I shouldn't involve myself in a partnership with this person. Maybe I shouldn't get in a relationship. So your emotion will trigger a dangerous response, which was sort of the reason why we have emotions. A fear response. Oh, there's a lion hanging out over there. I better be, aware of it. That emotion then triggers your kind of awareness. So emotions are essential to the rational process. The problem is you have no distance from your emotions. You're not able to take a step back and analyze, is this a rational response? Is there really a lion over there? Well, I live in Los Angeles. There's probably not a lion over there. It could be a coyote or something, right? So I'm able to step back and kind of analyze the nature of the threat, the nature of what could be something exciting or not. So that's the dividing line, I'm sorry, that'll go away.
I was it sounded like it was coming from my side. I'm like, I've never heard that ring before in my life.
I should unplug it. There's going to be one more ring. Hopefully it's telemarketing. I'm just getting inundated lately with telemarketing. Anyway, so the ability to step back and analyze your emotions and tell yourself, why am I feeling this way? Why am I angry? Why am I excited? That is the key point. That is what divides people who are truly able to be rational from those who can't be, right? So you have to train yourself. It's not natural to who we are, because our nature is to simply react, right? So the ability to stand back and say, no, I better wait. Maybe I should wait a couple of days before I send it. Let's see how I think tomorrow. And then tomorrow shows you that it was irrational, that your emotion wasn't really proportional to the event. So if your emotional reaction is proportional to the threat or to the opportunity, then there's a reason for it. But so often, particularly in this hyper social media environment where it's kind of like we're all feeling constant rage and anger, a lot of times it's not related to anything real, or it's out of proportion to the actual problem or threat. So you don't try and repress your emotions. You can't write a book. You can't start a business. You can't make a decision about what you want to do without the richness of emotions. The brain is an organic thing. Everything works together. So people who have had that damage where they can't feel the emotion, that the emotions are blocked, and there are brain damage that causes that, it's been shown that they can't make rational decisions because they can't decide. They can't feel what is good or what is bad, what is an opportunity, what is dangerous. So you want your emotions. You need them. You're not trying to repress them. Repressing emotions will lead to other problems. What you want is just that tiny little bit of distance, that ability when you're feeling it to go back and go, why am I really feeling this? What are the roots of it? That's a very powerful ability that you can use, that you can develop through practice, just like exercise will develop your muscles. Through being able to think before you react, it will slowly become natural to you. But you have to practice it, and you have to be aware of that's the source of your problem.
Do you have a method for how you practice that?
Well, the main thing is to be aware of it, because, we're creatures that definitely don't like anything kind of painful. We want our lives to be pleasurable. We've had painful experiences in our life. Generally, in social situations, I maintain that most pain is psychological and it comes from bad social interactions. Okay, so you don't want pain in your life. Obviously, everyone's going to answer that, right? So you don't want to make bad decisions. You don't want to have your emotions dragging you along and causing all kinds of havoc. So if you understand that that's the problem, you're now motivated to then try and tackle it. So I could give you the best techniques in the world, but it won't matter at all if you don't feel that need for it, that hunger for the ability to have a slight degree of control over your own actions. I practice meditation every morning, and I highly advocate it. I think it's been one of the best things I've ever done for myself. Been doing it now for over 10 years. It's like a ritual. And as you're meditating and you're emptying your mind, suddenly emotions and things will start welling up. You don't even know from where, like anger and all this kind of pissy stuff and things about your parents and about all your bad relationships, etc. And now you're thinking, why am I thinking about that now? The sun is shining. I'm trying to empty my mind. Why is this garbage welling up in me? And you start to have some distance and you start to see, I try and picture it like my thoughts and my emotions, they're out there. They're like 2 feet away from me. They're not inside my head. They're over there. And I could watch my mind creating this little theater of all these little problems and dramas. And that's a beautiful thing. I catch myself now, because I'm not perfect. I'm very human and I have the same problems that I'm talking about. But I catch myself maybe 50% of the time now